Please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story.
I don't even know why I still remember this date so vividly. Maybe because it started out like one of those rare nights where you think, damn, maybe this is finally the one. The kind of evening where you're sitting across from someone who seems totally normal, totally chill, and you let your guard down a little. I had been talking to Kelly for about a week before we agreed to meet. She was cute, funny over text, and didn't give off any weird vibes. I figured we'd grab dinner, talk about normal stuff, and see if there was any real chemistry. We met at this little Italian place downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't some cheap chain either. You know, the kind of spot with dim lights, tiny tables shoved close together, and a menu where everything's either covered in cheese or drowning in olive oil. Perfect date setting, at least for me. She walked in wearing this simple black dress and smiled when she spotted me. Right there, I thought, okay, this might actually be good. The first 30 minutes were solid. We talked about music, movies, random things like what we usually do on Sundays. I cracked a dumb joke about people who go to the gym just to sit in the sauna, and she laughed in that real kind of way where you know it's not fake. I ordered pasta. She got chicken parmesan, and it felt like one of those dinners you don't want to rush through. And then came the part where the whole vibe flipped. It wasn't like she planned it out, but halfway through twirling spaghetti on my fork, she leaned in a little and dropped the kind of line that just burns into your brain forever. She told me she still lives with her ex. At first, I thought she was joking. Like maybe she meant roommate but was just being dramatic about it. So I sort of smiled, waiting for her to laugh or explain. But she didn't. She just kept eating like she had casually mentioned the weather. I asked her why, trying to keep it light, and she said it was financially smart. I mean, yeah, rent is insane right now, I get it. But still, you don't really expect to hear that on a first date. Then she added the part that made my jaw tighten. She said sometimes, not always, but sometimes they still sleep in the same bed. Just casually, like she was saying sometimes she forgets to do laundry. I literally froze for a second because I didn't even know what to say. The way she said it made it worse. It wasn't like she was ashamed or thought it was weird. She actually seemed kind of proud of herself for figuring out this smart living arrangement. She said it saved her money and they were on good terms, so it wasn't an issue. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, how in the world did she decide this was good first date material? I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I was running through every possible reaction. Do I just laugh and change the subject? Do I call her out? Do I stand up and leave? I ended up just nodding slowly, probably looking like someone trying to pretend they understood advanced math. From that point on, everything felt awkward. She kept talking about how she doesn't really believe in moving out just because a relationship ends, that society pressures people too much to make big changes. I was nodding but not really hearing her, just staring at my plate wondering why this always happens to me. Like, why can't I just have a normal dinner where no one brings up their ex or some strange living situation? The waiter came around to refill our waters and asked if we wanted dessert. Normally, I would have said yes just to keep the night going, but I jumped in and said no before she even answered. I was ready to wrap it up. She seemed a little surprised, but she didn't push it. She just smiled and asked if I wanted to split the check. That part threw me off too. She was all about being financially smart, but it felt weird after everything she just said. I paid for the whole thing, not because I was trying to impress her at that point, but because I just wanted to end it clean. The total was around $62, and I slapped my card down without hesitation. I didn't even want to deal with splitting. We walked outside, and she gave me this casual hug like everything was completely normal. She even said she had fun and wanted to do it again. I muttered something about being busy and basically speed walked back to my car. The whole drive home, I was replaying it in my head, trying to figure out if maybe I overreacted. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't sit right. I mean, how can you even start a relationship with someone who's still living with their ex and occasionally sharing a bed? That's not just a red flag. That's like 20 red flags stapled together. I ended up ghosting her. Not proud of it, but I didn't see the point in having the "this isn't going to work" talk when she clearly thought her setup was perfectly fine. I still sometimes wonder if she ever told another date the same thing. Maybe some guy out there thought it was no big deal. But for me, that night was enough to make me double check my choices whenever someone seems too good to be true in the first half hour. So yeah, dinner with Kaylee went from promising to awkward real fast, and I left the restaurant with more questions than answers. At least the pasta was decent. I wasn't even planning on going out that night. To be honest, I almost canceled the whole thing because I was tired from work and just wanted to crash on the couch. But I'd been talking to Jad for a little while and he seemed cool enough, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Sometimes the dates you don't want to go on end up being the good ones, right? Well, this one was memorable, but not for the reasons I hoped. The restaurant was this middle of the road kind of spot, not fancy but not cheap either. Kind of the place you'd go if you wanted a decent burger and fries without dealing with fast food. It had dim lights, a little bar in the corner, families sitting around, the whole vibe just kind of cozy but not date perfect. I walked in and spotted him sitting at a booth, and for the first 5 minutes everything felt fine. We laughed a little about parking being a nightmare. He complimented my shirt, normal stuff. Here's the thing though. Right away, I noticed he kept glancing toward the entrance. At first, I thought maybe he was expecting a friend to swing by or maybe he was distracted. I brushed it off because I was trying to focus on making conversation. He ordered a lemonade, I got a soda, and we were talking about random things like travel and favorite foods. About 10 minutes in, he suddenly perked up like he was waiting for this exact moment. He leaned across the table, lowered his voice like he was about to tell me some deep secret, and then casually dropped it. He said he had brought his mom along to the restaurant. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But no, he was dead serious. He pointed toward the entrance, and sure enough, this middle-aged woman was standing there with her purse, looking around like she was waiting for him to wave her over. My brain just short-circuited for a second. I couldn't even process what he was saying, like who brings their mom to a first date, not just to drive them there or pick them up, but to actually sit down and be part of it. He went on to explain that his mom wanted to approve of me, his actual word, approve. Before I could react, he waved her over, and she started walking toward us. At that point, I felt like I had been pushed into some reality TV show without signing the waiver. She slid into the booth right next to him, smiled at me, and immediately started asking questions. It wasn't even light questions either. It was like a job interview. She wanted to know what I did for work, how much time I spent with my family, whether I liked cooking, whether I wanted kids, all of the heavy stuff. I was trying to be polite, answering as calmly as I could, but inside I was freaking out. This wasn't a normal first date. This was like meeting the in-laws before even deciding if I wanted a second drink. The weirdest part was how casual Jahed was about the whole thing. He didn't even look embarrassed. He sat there sipping his lemonade like this was totally normal. Every now and then, he'd nod along with his mom's questions like he was proud of her for grilling me. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, but with her sitting there, it just didn't feel possible. The food came, and instead of getting better, it got more awkward. His mom ordered a salad and picked at it while continuing her interrogation. I barely tasted my burger because I was too busy trying not to say something sarcastic. At one point, she actually said she believed women should always handle the housework and men should focus on providing. I almost choked on my fries. I looked at him to see if he'd say anything, but he just smiled like it was wisdom straight from the heavens. I tried to redirect the conversation to lighter topics, like movies or hobbies, but she just circled back to more personal stuff. She asked me how many serious relationships I had before, if my parents were still together, even what my thoughts were on religion. It felt less like dinner and more like a background check. Meanwhile, the people sitting in the booth behind us kept glancing over. I could feel their eyes on me, probably wondering why I was sitting across from a guy and his mom like some kind of third wheel. At that point, I just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. When the check finally came, I assumed Jod would grab it since he invited me out. But nope, he looked at me and said we should split it 3 ways. I'm not even kidding. 3 ways between him, me, and his mom. I stared at him, thinking maybe he was joking, but he was already pulling out his wallet. His mom didn't even flinch. She just put down some cash like she'd done this 100 times before. I put down $20 just to get out of there. The total wasn't much more than that, but I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. After we walked outside, his mom hugged me like I'd passed some kind of test. She said she liked me and thought I seemed like a nice girl. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but the second I got into my car, I just sat there in silence. On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying the whole thing. Who thinks it's a good idea to bring their mom on a first date? And not just bring her, but let her run the entire evening like she was a host of some matchmaking event. I texted a friend about it, and she didn't even believe me until I called and told her everything. I ended up blocking his number a couple of days later. Not because he was mean or rude, but because I couldn't imagine ever going on a second date knowing his mom might be sitting at the booth with us again. Looking back, it almost feels funny, like the kind of story you tell at a party just to make people laugh. But in the moment, it was pure embarrassment. I guess that's the kind of thing that sticks with you. Not the good dates where everything goes smoothly, but the bizarre ones that make you question what planet some people are living on. I swear I didn't even want to be on dating apps anymore by the time I met Harper. I had been swiping mindlessly for weeks, half out of boredom, half out of hope, and most of the people I matched with never made it past a day of conversation. But Harper was different at first glance. She had this bright smile, said she liked hiking, and even threw in a dumb joke about preferring pineapple on pizza. It seemed harmless enough. So when she suggested coffee, I thought, why not? Coffee is low pressure. Worst case, I'd drink a latte and go home. We picked this little coffee shop that looked like it belonged in some indie movie. Wooden tables, chalkboard menu, baristas who looked like they were judging you silently while making your drink. I got there a bit early, grabbed a seat near the window, and waited. She walked in a few minutes later, and I'll admit she looked even better in person. Confident, casual, wearing this oversized sweater that somehow made her look both relaxed and put together. We ordered our drinks, me with my boring iced coffee, her with some complicated caramel oat milk latte thing, and sat down. The first 10 minutes were standard. Where are you from? What do you do? Do you have pets? Normal icebreaker stuff. I was actually starting to feel pretty good about it. And then, out of nowhere, she shifted gears. She leaned back, crossed her arms like she was about to deliver a TED talk, and started explaining her philosophy on relationships. At first, I thought it was just casual conversation. Everyone has preferences, right? But the way she laid it out felt rehearsed, like she had given this speech before. She said, straight-faced, that she only dates men who can fully financially support her. Not like help out with bills or split rent. No, she meant full-on take care of every expense. She said her dream was to never work again and spend her days focusing on herself. I nearly spit out my drink. I laughed at first, thinking she was exaggerating, but she wasn't smiling. She was dead serious. She explained that she had tried working a couple of jobs in the past, but hated it, and she decided it just wasn't for her. She wanted to live a lifestyle where she didn't have to think about money. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there trying to process if I'm being pranked. She didn't even hesitate. She just kept talking about it like it was the most normal thing in the world. She said she wanted a man who made enough money to cover not just the essentials, but also vacations, shopping, fancy restaurants, the whole 9 yards. She wanted security, as she put it, and she thought that was the bare minimum requirement for her to consider being serious with someone. I asked her gently what she planned to contribute in the relationship. She didn't even blink. She said she would provide companionship and support. That was it. She actually said those words like they were enough to replace having a job. The worst part was how casual she was about it. She wasn't embarrassed or hesitant. It was like she was laying out her grocery list. At one point, she even said she had read somewhere online that men feel more fulfilled when they provide for their partner. So technically, she was doing men a favor by not working. I had to bite my tongue so hard not to laugh. The conversation spiraled from there. She started talking about the kind of house she wanted to live in, something with a big backyard, maybe a pool, definitely a walk-in closet for all the clothes she planned to buy. She said she didn't mind kids, but only if she had a nanny because she didn't want to waste her energy on childcare. She literally used the word waste. I kept nodding, partly because I didn't know how else to react and partly because I was trying not to look like I was about to bolt out the door. Every time I thought the conversation couldn't get more ridiculous, she added something else. She talked about how she'd never date a man who made less than 6 figures. She even joked, though it didn't feel like a joke, that she sometimes asked guys for their tax return info before getting serious. The people sitting at the table next to us were clearly listening in, because I caught one of them side-eyeing me with this good luck look. I wanted to sink to the floor. At one point, she asked me directly how much I made. Not in a roundabout way, not casually. Straight up. So what's your salary? I stumbled over my words because I wasn't about to throw out a number on a first date over lattes. She pressed again, and I deflected by saying I was comfortable enough to cover my bills. That clearly wasn't the answer she wanted, because she tilted her head and said something about needing more ambition than man. By the time I finished my iced coffee, I already knew there wasn't going to be a second date. The vibe was dead, at least for me, but Harper didn't seem to notice. She kept talking about her dream life, about how she hated the idea of waking up early for a job, and about how she thought love was simpler when one person handled all the finances. When the check came, she didn't even glance at it. She just sat back, sipping the last of her latte, waiting for me to handle it. I paid the $14 without saying a word, mostly because I didn't want to drag it out. We walked out of the coffee shop, and she gave me this quick hug like everything went perfectly. She even said she wanted to see me again soon, maybe for dinner at this fancy sushi place she liked. I smiled politely, got into my car, and immediately shook my head the second I shut the door. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept replaying her words, wondering if she actually believed what she was saying, or if she just thought she could charm her way into someone's wallet. Either way, it was one of the strangest dates I've ever been on. I never texted her again, and she never followed up either. Maybe she sensed I wasn't going to fund her dream of permanent vacation mode. Or maybe she had a lineup of other guys who were willing to audition for the role. Either way, I was out. That was the first and last time I ever saw Harper, and honestly, I don't regret it one bit.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far, and if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
You ever have one of those nights where everything feels normal at first, and then out of nowhere it just goes sideways? That's exactly what happened when I went out with Mo. I remember the weather was nice that night. Not too hot, not too cold, just one of those evenings where you don't mind walking around downtown a bit before going into a restaurant. I was even in a good mood on the drive over, blasting music in the car, thinking maybe I'd finally have a decent date after all the duds lately. I got to the restaurant a couple minutes early. It wasn't anything fancy, just a mid-range spot with booths and big TVs on the wall showing whatever sports game was on. I figured that was a safe choice. No pressure, no crazy prices, just a place you could sit down and talk without feeling stiff. Mo showed up wearing a button-up shirt and jeans, nothing too flashy, but he looked good. Confident, relaxed, the kind of guy who seems like he's done this a few times. We sat down, ordered some drinks, and things started off great. Conversation was easy. He cracked a couple jokes that actually landed, which doesn't always happen on first dates. We talked about food, travel, some random hobbies. I was starting to think this might actually go somewhere. I ordered a burger, he ordered steak, and while we were waiting, the conversation just flowed naturally. But then came the turn, and it wasn't just a small turn. It was one of those hard lefts that you don't see coming. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, Mo leaned back in his seat and casually dropped the kind of information that can change the whole mood of the night. He said he had 3 kids. Now, I don't automatically judge someone for having kids. Life happens, and people have pasts. But the way he said it threw me off. He didn't lead into it. He didn't ease it in. He just tossed it out there like he was mentioning a favorite TV show. 3 kids. I asked him how old they were, trying to play it cool, and he rattled off their ages. One was in elementary school, one was in preschool, and the youngest was still in diapers. I nodded slowly, letting it sink in, and then he casually added that each kid had a different mom. I had to take a sip of my drink to buy myself a second because my brain was going, wait, what? 3 kids, 3 different moms. He said it so matter of fact, like he was giving me directions to the nearest gas station. I don't know if he thought I'd just be impressed by his honesty or if he genuinely didn't think it was a big deal, but I sat there stunned for a second. The thing that made it worse was how he explained it. He didn't really take responsibility for any of it. He kind of brushed it off, saying the relationships just didn't work out, but that he was still cool with all the moms. He said he was trying his best to be in his kids' lives, but it wasn't always easy. And then, without missing a beat, he started talking about how he wasn't even sure he wanted to be exclusive with me. That's when the red flag turned into a whole parade. Like, here's this guy sitting across from me, telling me he already has 3 kids with 3 different women. And instead of talking about being serious with someone new, he's telling me he might still want to date around. I sat there staring at him, trying not to let my face give everything away, but inside I was already done. I couldn't believe how casual he was about it all. He kept eating his steak like this was just another Tuesday night conversation. I picked at my fries, nodding along, but the more he talked, the more it felt like he had zero awareness of how insane this sounded. He even started talking about how he wasn't sure if he wanted more kids. He said maybe one day, maybe not, but if he did, he wanted to make sure the timing was right. I couldn't believe it. 3 kids already, 3 different moms, and he's talking about timing like that's something he's been careful about. I tried to shift the conversation to something lighter, but it kept circling back to his kids. He told me about their personalities, their favorite cartoons, even some of the drama with the moms. At one point, he actually laughed about how one of the moms still hated his guts, like it was some funny story instead of a massive red flag. The whole time I kept thinking, how do you bring this up on a first date and then follow it with, I'm not sure I want to be exclusive? It made no sense. If you've got that kind of history, wouldn't you be upfront that you're looking for stability? But no, he made it sound like I should just sign up for the roller coaster and see what happens. By the time the check came, I was done. I didn't even want dessert, and I always want dessert. The bill came to around $54, and he paid for it without asking to split. I'll give him that. At least he covered the meal. But honestly, it didn't matter at that point. We walked outside, and he gave me this grin like he thought the night went perfectly. He even suggested we should hang out again, maybe catch a movie or grab drinks somewhere. I smiled politely, told him I'd let him know, and then walked to my car as fast as possible. On the drive home, I couldn't stop shaking my head. 3 kids, 3 moms, and no clue if he wanted to actually date seriously. I don't know if he thought honesty would make it better, but all it did was make me realize I wanted no part of that mess. I got home, threw my shoes off, and sat on the couch in silence for a minute. The whole thing felt surreal. Like, who actually thinks that's acceptable first date conversation? And who thinks saying, I'm not sure about exclusivity after admitting all of that would go over well? I never texted him again, and he didn't reach out either. Maybe he realized I wasn't going to sign up for that circus. Or maybe he had another date lined up the next night to drop the same bomb. Either way, that was the last time I saw Mo. Looking back, the steak was probably the best part of that night, and it wasn't even that good. You know when you go into a date already overthinking it, but you try to calm yourself down by saying it's just dinner, not a job interview. That's how I felt before meeting Lily. I had this weird gut feeling it was going to be awkward, but not for any specific reason. Maybe because she didn't talk much over text. She gave me short answers, a lot of lol or sounds good, so I figured she just wasn't a big texter and would open up more in person. Spoiler, that was not the case. We met at a sushi place she picked out. I'd never been there before, but it looked kind of trendy, the kind of place where the plates are small and the waiters all wear black. I don't even love sushi that much, but I wanted to keep an open mind. I got there a few minutes early and waited by the entrance. Lily walked in right on time, wearing a blazer over a dress, and she had this air about her, like she was heading to a meeting instead of a date. She didn't even smile when she saw me, just gave a small nod like we were business partners. We sat down, ordered some drinks, and looked at the menu. The first few minutes of conversation were fine, just kind of stiff. Where are you from? What do you do? How's your week been? I was hoping once the food came, things would loosen up. But instead, she leaned across the table, folded her hands like a lawyer, and asked me what my opinion was on prenups. At first, I thought I misheard her. Who brings up prenups 15 minutes into a first date? I asked her to repeat herself, and she did, perfectly calm, like this was the most natural thing in the world. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to sign a prenup if we ever got married. I almost choked on my water. I hadn't even decided if I wanted to see her again after this meal, and she was already talking about marriage contracts. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe she was joking, but her face was dead serious. She explained that she had been burned before, and she wasn't going to let it happen again. She said she believed in being upfront right away so no one wasted time. I tried to play it off lightheartedly, saying something like, well, marriage isn't even on my radar right now, so it's kind of hard to say. But she didn't let it go. She kept pressing. She wanted a clear answer. She even said that if I wasn't the kind of man who believed in protecting assets, then we probably weren't a good match. The weird part was I didn't even know what assets she was talking about. From the way she described her life over text, she didn't seem like she was rolling in money. She mentioned she had a decent job, but she wasn't living in a mansion or anything. But here she was, laying out prenup talk like she had millions in the bank. I asked her what exactly she had in mind. She told me very bluntly that she had savings and investment account, and she planned to buy property soon. She didn't want any man taking half of it if things went south. I nodded, even though my brain was screaming, why are we talking about this on a first date? The food came and I hoped maybe the conversation would shift to something normal. Nope. She kept weaving it back to the prenup. She gave me examples of friends of hers who got divorced and lost half of everything. She told me about how unfair the legal system was. She even brought up statistics she had clearly memorized, talking about divorce rates like she was giving a presentation. The whole time, I couldn't even enjoy my food. I barely remember what I ordered. Some roll with shrimp, I think, but all I remember is chewing while she gave me her TED talk on financial protection. People at the table next to us were laughing and clinking glasses, having fun, and I was sitting there being quizzed about what kind of legal contract I'd be willing to sign. At one point, she asked me directly, so would you sign one? Like she wasn't going to let me dodge it anymore. I sighed and said, if the situation called for it, I'd think about it. That was the only answer I could give without completely shutting her down. She nodded, finally satisfied, and then launched into a whole explanation about what terms she would want included. It didn't stop there either. She told me she believed in combining bank accounts only partially. She believed in keeping separate credit. She even told me about the kind of lawyer she would hire if the time came. I wanted to bang my head on the table. The vibe was completely dead for me at that point. I didn't feel like I was on a date. I felt like I was in a consultation meeting. She barely asked me anything personal outside of the prenup talk. She didn't care about my hobbies, my family, or my goals. She just wanted to know if I'd be willing to sign on the dotted line in some hypothetical future. When the bill came, I paid it minus $47, and she didn't even offer to split. Not that I cared about splitting, but the way she leaned back, waiting for me to handle it, just sealed the deal for me. We walked out, and she gave me the most professional hug I've ever received. No warmth, no excitement. Just a quick squeeze and a we'll talk. I got into my car and sat there for a minute in disbelief. I actually laughed out loud. I've had some weird first dates, but that one takes the cake. Who asks about prenups before the second drink even arrives? I didn't text her afterward. A couple days later, she messaged me saying she thought we had a productive conversation. That's literally how she phrased it, productive conversation. I stared at my phone, shook my head, and never replied. And that was it. My first and last date with Lily, the woman who wanted me to sign a prenup before we even split a plate of sushi rolls. I've had some bad dates in my life, but the one with Dominic stands out because it wasn't just bad. It was straight up embarrassing. The kind of date where halfway through you start wondering if you're being pranked, like maybe someone's about to pop out from behind a plant with a camera crew. I wasn't. But Dominic didn't need a camera crew because he brought his own. The way it started was totally normal. We agreed to meet at this diner that I actually like, one of those old school places with checkered floors and giant menus that have way too many options. I figured a casual setting was safe. You can't really go wrong with burgers and milkshakes. I walked in, spotted him at a booth, and waved. He stood up to greet me, which I thought was polite. He looked normal enough, jeans and a hoodie, nothing weird. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started chatting. He seemed a little distracted, fiddling with his phone under the table, but I brushed it off. Everyone's glued to their phones these days, right? Things were fine at first. We talked about random stuff like music, travel, and what we usually do on weekends. The kind of surface level chatter you expect when you don't know someone yet. I was sipping on my soda, nodding along, when all of a sudden he pulled his phone out and set it up against the salt shaker on the table. At first, I thought he was just checking a text or maybe showing me a funny video. But no, he angled the phone directly at me, hit record, and announced that he was filming content for his dating reaction channel on YouTube. I froze. I just sat there staring at him, thinking, wait, what? Did he seriously just say that? He was smiling like this was the most normal thing in the world, like every guy films his dates and throws them online for strangers to watch. He explained that his channel was all about showing people real dating interactions, so his viewers could learn from his experiences. He said he usually recorded his dates and then posted commentary over the footage later. He even bragged about how his channel had potential to blow up. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there horrified because this guy is literally recording me without my permission in the middle of a diner. People at the booth behind us noticed and started whispering, and I wanted to melt into the floor. I told him I wasn't comfortable being filmed. He shrugged and said it was no big deal, that he'd blur my face if I wanted. Like that was supposed to make it okay. He actually acted surprised that I didn't want to be part of his content. The food came out while I was still trying to decide if I should just walk out. The waiter set down my plate, glanced at the phone pointing at me, and gave me this look like, "You okay?" I almost wanted to ask him to call the manager just to make it stop, but I didn't. I tried to keep it cool, hoping Dominic would take the hint. He didn't. Instead, he kept glancing at the phone and asking me questions like, "So what are your first impressions of me? And what do you usually look for in a guy?" He wasn't even listening to my answers. He was fishing for content. He kept grinning at the camera like he was hosting a show. The whole vibe was ruined. I couldn't even enjoy my food. I had ordered pancakes and bacon because diner pancakes are always the best, but they tasted like cardboard with the phone pointed at me the whole time. He was way more interested in his video than in me. At one point, he even asked me to react naturally when he pretended to tell me something shocking. He leaned forward, lowered his voice like he was about to confess something, and then said he once got dumped because he forgot a girl's birthday. Then he stared at me expectantly, waiting for some big reaction for his viewers. I just blinked at him. He got annoyed and said I wasn't giving him enough material. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't even a date anymore. It was unpaid acting for this channel, and I wasn't interested in playing along. Finally, I told him flat out that I didn't want to be recorded, and I asked him to turn it off. He sighed, muttered something about me not being chill, and then reluctantly stopped recording. But the damage was done. The whole night was already wrecked. We sat in silence for a bit, me stabbing at my pancakes and scrolling through his phone like he couldn't wait to get home and edit his footage. He didn't even seem embarrassed about it. If anything, he seemed annoyed that I had ruined his content. When the check came, it was $32, and he just sat there staring at it. I wasn't about to drag the night out any longer, so I threw down my card and paid. He didn't even say thank you. He was too busy typing on his phone, probably tweeting about his date that didn't go as planned. We walked out of the diner and he barely looked at me. He gave a half-hearted hug and said he'd let me know when the video drops. I didn't even respond. I just got in my car and drove off, fuming. On the way home, I kept thinking about how insane it was. Who brings a camera to a date and expects someone to be okay with being broadcast to strangers online? It wasn't just inconsiderate, it was creepy. The whole time, I felt like I wasn't even a person to him. I was just content. I checked his YouTube channel later out of morbid curiosity. He only had like 200 subscribers, and his videos were mostly shaky clips of him asking awkward questions to different girls at restaurants. I couldn't even watch more than one. They were so cringy. He called himself a dating coach, which made me laugh out loud. Needless to say, I never heard from him again. And if he ever did upload our date, I never saw it. I didn't want to even the view. That was the last time I agreed to meet someone without at least Googling them first. Lesson learned. Well, not really a lesson. More like just a night I'll never forget for all the wrong reasons. There are bad first dates, and then there are the ones that make you wonder if you accidentally signed up for an interrogation. The night I went out with Mabel falls into the second category. I'm still a little stunned when I think about it because it wasn't just awkward, it was invasive. We matched on an app, nothing special, just one of those quick swipes after work when you're bored. She seemed nice enough over text. Her photos looked normal, her profile said she liked reading, hiking, and trying out new restaurants. Nothing that raised any red flags. We agreed to meet for dinner at this casual grill place not far from me. I walked in feeling pretty good about it. The place smelled like barbecue and garlic bread, which already put me in a decent mood. It wasn't loud, just a steady hum of people chatting, clinking silverware, and the occasional laugh from a table in the corner. Mabel walked in a few minutes after me. She was easy to spot. Long hair, neat outfit, carrying herself, like she had everything figured out. She smiled when she saw me, so I thought, okay, this could be a decent night. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking. The first few minutes were fine, just the usual first date chatter. She told me she worked in marketing, and I talked about my job. She said she liked to cook, but only on weekends, and I joked about how I'd burned frozen pizza once. It was light, it was fine, nothing unusual. And then, about 20 minutes in, she leaned forward, rested her elbows on the table, and said she had something she wanted to tell me. I thought maybe she was going to share some quirky fun fact about herself. I was not prepared for what came out of her mouth. She told me she had already looked up my parents' property records. At first, I just stared at her, thinking I had misheard. I blinked a few times and asked what she meant. She repeated it calmly, like she had just told me her favorite color. She said she had done a little digging before the date, and she wanted to make sure I came from enough money. I swear my jaw actually dropped. She was so casual about it, like this was just part of her pre-date routine. She explained how property records are public, and it only took a little research to find out where my family lived, how much their house was worth, and what taxes they paid. I sat there frozen, my burger untouched in front of me, wondering what kind of person does that before meeting someone. She went on to say that it wasn't personal, that she just needed to filter out people who didn't meet her standards. She started breaking it down like she was presenting a report. She said my parents' house was nice enough, but not extravagant. She knew the exact value because she'd looked it up online. She even knew when they bought it and how much they paid back then. She said it told her a lot about how I was probably raised and what kind of lifestyle I was used to. I was floored. She wasn't asking me questions. She was making statements. About my life, about my family, about how I grew up, all based on numbers she found online. The weirdest part was how calm she was while saying it. She didn't sound embarrassed or even self-conscious. She spoke like she was proud of herself for doing her homework. She said dating was about making smart investments, and she wasn't about to waste her time on someone who didn't have financial stability in their background. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe she was joking or trying to test my reaction. But she didn't laugh. She just sipped her drink and kept talking about how people should be more honest about money before wasting each other's time. My appetite was gone. I poked at my fries, nodding along, but inside I was uncomfortable. It wasn't just the fact that she dug into my family's property records. It was how she thought it was totally fine to tell me that on the first date. Like she expected me to be impressed by how thorough she was. She even asked me if I planned on inheriting the house one day. I almost choked. Who asked that 30 minutes into meeting someone? She said it would be good to know because long-term planning mattered to her. At that point, I just wanted the night to end. I checked the time on my phone, pretending I had an early morning. The waiter came by to ask how everything was, and I said, "Great, can we get the check?" Without hesitation. The bill came to around $39. I paid it because I didn't even want to bother splitting, and she didn't offer anyway. She just sat back, smiling, like she'd accomplished something by getting all of her questions out. We walked outside, and she gave me a polite hug. She said she appreciated my transparency, which made me laugh internally because I hadn't been transparent about anything. She had done all the digging herself. I mumbled something about being busy the next week, got in my car, and drove off as fast as I could without looking like a maniac. On the way home, I kept shaking my head. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It wasn't just invasive, it was insulting. Like she thought my worth as a person could be measured by the value of my parents' house. The more I thought about it, the weirder it felt. What if she had dug deeper? What if she had pulled up more information about me or about my family before even meeting me? I told a couple friends about it later, and they thought I was exaggerating until I repeated her exact words. Then they just laughed and said I dodged a bullet. Maybe I did, but honestly, the whole thing still makes me uneasy when I think about it. That was the first and last time I ever saw Mabel. I blocked her number before she even had the chance to text me. I figured if she could look up my family's house, she didn't need my number anyway. And that was that. Dinner with a side of property records. I don't know why I even agreed to go out with Alex. Looking back, there were already small signs that I probably should have skipped it. He wasn't bad over text, but he had this habit of dodging direct questions. Like if I asked him something simple, what do you do for work, or what's your favorite type of food? He'd answer in this vague way, but he didn't want to give too much away. At first, I chalked it up to nerves or maybe just not being much of a texter. But deep down, I had this nagging feeling. Still, I told myself to stop overanalyzing. Everyone's weird over text. People are usually better in person. So when he suggested dinner, I went along with it. He picked this Mexican restaurant that I actually liked. It was one of those spots with neon lights in the windows, loud music playing, and plates that come out sizzling. I figured at least the food would be good even if the date was a flop. I got there a little early and sat at the bar while I waited. He walked in about 5 minutes later, tall, decent looking, wearing a button-up shirt tucked into jeans. He smiled when he saw me, and for the first couple minutes, everything seemed fine. We got seated, ordered drinks, and started chatting. He was charming enough, asking about my day, telling me little stories about his job. I actually relaxed a bit, thinking maybe I judged him too quickly. The conversation wasn't groundbreaking, but it was flowing, and I was focused more on whether I wanted tacos or enchiladas than anything else. The food came, and we dug in. I was halfway through my plate when he casually dropped the kind of bomb you don't forget. He said, in the same tone someone might use to mention they liked spicy salsa, that he was engaged. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. I thought maybe I'd misheard him over the noise of the music. But no, he said it again, even clearer this time. He was already engaged. At first, I just sat there, staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Then I laughed a little, thinking maybe he meant he used to be engaged. But he shook his head and explained. He was currently engaged to someone. Like ring on the finger engaged. Wedding on the horizon engaged. I couldn't even form words. My brain was scrambling to make sense of what he was saying. And then he added the part that made it worse. He told me he just wanted to see what else was out there before officially committing. My jaw actually dropped. Here was this man sitting across from me, eating tacos like everything was totally normal, while admitting he was basically auditioning backup plans in case he changed his mind about his fiancée. The arrogance of it blew my mind. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't lower his voice. He just laid it all out there like it was no big deal. He said he liked his fiancée, but he wasn't sure if she was the one, so he was testing the waters. I couldn't even eat anymore. My stomach turned. I pushed my plate aside and just stared at him, trying to decide if I should get up and leave or hear him out just to confirm how insane he really was. He kept talking, completely oblivious to how horrified I was. He said he believed most people settled too quickly and that he wanted to make sure he didn't make the wrong choice. He even said he thought his fiancée would understand if she knew because it was just part of his process. I wanted to scream. She would understand. What planet was he living on? The more he talked, the angrier I got. He described his fiancée in detail, how long they'd been together, what she did for work, even how they were already planning parts of their wedding. And yet, here he was sitting with me, fishing for validation that maybe he could do better. At one point, he even asked me what I thought about marriage. Like he wanted my input, as if I was supposed to help him make his decision. I stared at him in disbelief, wondering if he actually heard himself. I gave him short answers after that, just enough to not cause a scene. But inside, I was done. I couldn't believe I was wasting a night on this. He kept eating like nothing was wrong, wiping salsa off his chin, sipping his margarita, and smiling like this was just another casual date. The waiter came to check on us, and I jumped at the chance to end it. I asked for the check before Alex could even open his mouth. The total was around $46. I slapped my card down immediately because I didn't want him thinking this was a real date anymore. I paid, thanked the waiter, and stood up. Alex looked surprised. He asked if I wanted to go grab a drink somewhere else after. I nearly laughed in his face. I said I had to go and walked out before he could say another word. The second I got outside, I pulled out my phone and texted a friend about what just happened. I was so mad I couldn't even type straight. I kept messing up the words because my hands were shaking. I couldn't believe someone would actually do that. Not just cheat, but openly admit it like it was nothing. The drive home was just me blasting music as loud as I could to drown out my thoughts. I felt gross, like I'd been dragged into something I didn't sign up for. I couldn't stop picturing his fiancée, completely unaware that the guy she was planning a wedding with was sitting across from other women, testing the waters. I blocked his number the second I walked in my front door. I didn't care if he tried to reach out. He wasn't going to hear from me again. That night stuck with me, not because I cared about Alex, I didn't, but because it made me realize how many people probably do stuff like that in secret. The only difference with him was that he was bold enough, or maybe stupid enough, to admit it out loud. And that's the story of how I ended up sitting across from an engaged man who was still out dating. Worst techos I've ever had. Some dates are boring, some are weird, and then there's the rare kind that completely blindsides you. That's how it felt the night I went out with Lauren. I didn't even think much of it before we met. She looked nice enough in her pictures, had a couple of jokes in her bio, and she actually responded to messages in full sentences instead of one-word replies. That alone put her ahead of half the people I'd been talking to. We agreed to meet at this Italian place I'd been to once before. It wasn't anything over the top, just a decent spot with red tablecloths and candles on the tables to make it feel fancier than it really was. When I got there, she was already waiting by the door. She smiled when she saw me, gave me a quick hug, and for the first few minutes, I thought, hey, this might actually go well. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking. The conversation was easy at first. She told me she worked in healthcare, and I told her a bit about my job. We joked about the menu being way too long, and we both ended up ordering pasta. It felt like any other first date, light, casual, with enough back and forth to keep things moving. About 15 minutes in, though, the tone of the night shifted completely. I don't even know how we got there. One second we were talking about our favorite shows, and the next, she was looking at me very seriously, telling me she wanted kids. Not just someday or in the future. She said she wanted one now. I chuckled at first, thinking maybe she meant she loved kids and was just saying it strongly. But no, she leaned in and clarified. She wanted a child immediately. As in, she was actively looking for someone to start trying with. That night. I blinked at her, completely thrown off. I didn't even know what to say. I mean, this was our first date. We hadn't even finished the breadsticks, and she was already talking about having a baby together. She said she was ready, that she was tired of waiting, and that she wanted to find a man who was serious about it. I sat there forcing a smile, but inside my head, alarms were going off. It wasn't just the intensity, it was the timing. Most people ease into that conversation after a few months, or at least a few dates. But here she was, laying it all out there like we were speed running a relationship. She kept going too. She said she'd already looked into her options, that she knew what kind of timeline she wanted, and that she wasn't interested in wasting time on guys who weren't on the same page. She asked me point blank if I wanted children. I said yes, eventually, but not right this second. She frowned and said she wasn't sure if eventually worked for her. The waiter came by to refill our water glasses, and I was praying he'd just stand there for a while so I could get a break from the conversation. No luck. He left quickly, and Lauren jumped right back into it. She asked me what I thought about parenting styles, about schools, about what kind of home I pictured raising kids in. She was drilling me with questions like we were filling out an application for parenthood. The more she talked, the more uncomfortable I got. It wasn't just that she wanted kids, it was how urgent she made it sound. She said she didn't want to waste time dating guys who weren't willing to start immediately. She even said she thought first dates were the best time to bring it up because it filtered people out faster. I nodded along, trying to stay polite, but inside I was screaming. I had no idea how to respond without making things even more awkward. I twirled pasta around my fork, pretending to be thoughtful, but really I was just counting down the minutes until I could leave. At one point, she asked me what I was doing after dinner. I said I didn't know yet, hoping to keep it vague. That's when she hit me with it again. She said, "Well, if you're serious about wanting kids, we could start trying tonight." I almost dropped my fork. She said it calmly, like she was suggesting grabbing dessert somewhere. My face must have given me away because she quickly added that she wasn't joking. She wanted to get started right away. I didn't even know how to recover from that. I laughed nervously, shook my head, and said something about how I wasn't ready for that kind of step. She looked disappointed, but not embarrassed. She said she appreciated my honesty, but that she hoped I'd come around. The rest of the dinner was painfully awkward. I gave short answers, and she kept circling back to kids, as if repeating herself might change my mind. The waiter asked if we wanted dessert, and I immediately said no. I wanted out of there as fast as possible. The check came minus $51, and I paid it without hesitation. I didn't even think about splitting. I just wanted the night to be over. She thanked me politely, and we walked outside together. She gave me a hug and said she still had a good time, then mentioned again that she was serious about her timeline. I smiled weakly, mumbled something about being busy, and got in my car. The whole drive home, I was replaying it in my head. I couldn't believe she had brought it up like that, so fast, so intense. It wasn't just surprising, it was overwhelming. I couldn't imagine starting something with someone who wanted to dive headfirst into parenthood with a person they'd just met over pasta. When I got home, I told a couple of friends about it, and they thought I was exaggerating until I repeated her exact words. One of them even joked that maybe I should have run out of the restaurant. I laughed, but honestly, I had considered it. I never texted her again, and she never reached out either. Maybe she found someone more on her timeline. Maybe she's already got what she wanted by now. All I know is that I'll never forget sitting across from someone on a first date while they told me, without hesitation, that they wanted me to father their child immediately. I'm not the type of person who usually catches small red flags early on. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Most of the time I tell myself, maybe they're just nervous, or maybe they're just not great at texting. That's what I thought with Ryan. Over messages, he came across as a little too enthusiastic, but I figured that was better than someone who barely put in effort. He always had something to say, always commented on my stories, always seemed excited to meet. We finally agreed to go out one Friday night. He picked a little gastropub downtown, one of those places with wood-paneled walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It was packed but not chaotic, and the smell of burgers and fried food kind of made the whole place feel cozy. I got there first and grabbed us a table in the corner. Ryan showed up a few minutes later, and right away he seemed comfortable. He gave me a big smile, slid into the seat across from me, and started talking before the menus were even open. He had this high energy vibe like he'd been waiting for this night forever. At first, it wasn't bad. We ordered drinks, shared some fries, and joked about the menu being overpriced. The conversation bounced around work, hobbies, random shows we both read, music. I was relaxing, thinking this could actually be a decent night. Then, out of nowhere, he dropped something that changed the whole tone. We were halfway through eating when he leaned forward, lowered his voice like he was letting me in on a secret, and said he'd been following my social media for months before asking me out. I stopped chewing. My brain needed a second to process what he just said. Months, not a week or two, not, "Oh, I checked out your page after we matched." No, months. He smiled like it was cute, like I'd be flattered by this confession. He went on to explain how he had stumbled across my profile long before we matched and started following everything I posted. He mentioned specific things, photos from trips I'd taken, random captions I'd written, even jokes I'd posted months ago. He remembered details I had forgotten myself. I felt this uncomfortable chill in my stomach. It wasn't just that he'd seen my posts. Plenty of people do that. It was how he described it, like he'd been studying me. He said he already felt like he knew me before we even met, that he'd been building up to asking me out once the timing was right. The way he said building up made me freeze. He wasn't embarrassed. He was proud of himself, like this was some kind of romantic backstory. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out how long exactly he'd been watching my stuff, and whether or not I should be worried. I asked him how long he'd been following, trying to keep my voice casual. He admitted it had been about 6 months. 6 months. He even laughed about how he almost messaged me earlier but wanted to wait until he thought I was ready. That part creeped me out the most. How would he even know when I was ready? He started listing off little things he liked about my posts. He said he loved how I always posted food pictures when I went out, that he thought it was cute when I complained about traffic, that he noticed I never posted late at night because I wasn't a night owl. He had been tracking patterns in my posts like I was some kind of project. I kept nodding, forcing little smiles, but inside I was panicking. This wasn't normal first date conversation. This was someone pulling back the curtain to show me how much he'd been watching. The weirdest part was how confident he was about it. He wasn't apologetic, he wasn't shy. He acted like this was proof of how much effort he was putting in. Like I should be impressed he knew my favorite coffee shop before I even mentioned it. I tried to steer the conversation in another direction, but he kept circling back. He told me he had screenshots of some of my old posts that had made him laugh. Screenshots. I nearly dropped my glass when he said that. He said he kept them because they reminded him of me before he even knew me. The rest of the date was a blur. I couldn't even taste my food anymore. My brain was stuck on the idea of him scrolling through my social media every day for months, collecting little details like souvenirs. When the check came, it was around $58. He grabbed it and insisted on paying, saying it was the least he could do after waiting so long to finally sit across from me. The way he phrased it sent another wave of discomfort through me. We walked outside, and he seemed perfectly happy, like the night had gone great. He gave me a hug and said he couldn't wait to see me again. I forced a smile, told him I'd be in touch, and got into my car as fast as I could. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept thinking about all the little things he'd mentioned, how much he'd been paying attention, and how casually he'd admitted to it. It didn't feel romantic. It felt like I had been studied without knowing. When I got home, I checked my social media, scrolling back through old posts, wondering which ones he'd saved. I couldn't look at my own page without feeling weird. I ended up setting everything to private that night. I didn't text him after, and when he messaged me a couple of days later, I ignored it. He sent another one, asking if everything was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I just blocked him. That was the end of Ryan. A date that started with fries and ended with me locking down all my accounts like I was under surveillance. I don't usually get nervous about dates. I've been on enough of them to know it's either going to click or it's not, and stressing about it doesn't change the outcome. That's what I told myself when I agreed to meet Nicole. She seemed normal enough when we first started talking, funny, sharp, quick to reply. She worked in finance, which didn't mean much to me except she always seemed busy. We talked for about a week before deciding on dinner. The place she picked was one of those trendy spots where everything looks like it belongs on Instagram. Exposed brick walls, tiny candles on each table, waiters in aprons that look too clean to actually be used. The kind of place where you can't order anything without it coming on some weird plate or board instead of just a normal dish. It was fancier than what I usually go for, but I figured, hey, if she wants it, fine. I got there first, and she walked in not long after. She was well-dressed, professional, the kind of woman who clearly knew how to carry herself. She smiled when she saw me, and we did the usual polite hug before sitting down. The first few minutes went fine, ordering drinks, making small talk, glancing through the menu. I started to think maybe this would be one of those straightforward dates where nothing crazy happens. But then Nicole leaned back, gave me this calm but intense look, and said she had something to tell me. She wasn't nervous about it. If anything, she seemed almost proud. She said she had already Googled my salary. I blinked, thinking maybe she was joking. Who even admits something like that out loud? But no, she was serious. She explained that she had done a quick search based on my job title and the company I worked for, and she'd already figured out the average salary range for someone in my position. I sat there stunned because I didn't even know how to respond. It wasn't just that she had looked it up. It was the way she told me so casually, like it was perfectly acceptable. She even smiled a little as she explained how she believed in being upfront about money. Then she dropped the part that made my stomach twist. She said she'd only consider continuing with me if that number increased within the next year. I nearly choked on my drink. She had basically just told me I was on probation, like this was a performance review instead of a date. She said she wanted a man who was financially upward, and that she wasn't interested in staying with someone who stagnated. Her words, not mine. I tried to laugh it off, saying something like, "That's a little intense for a first date," but she didn't laugh. She looked me straight in the eye and said she wasn't here to waste time. The weirdest part was how she broke it down like it was a business transaction. She started talking about long-term planning, about how she had goals for where she wanted to be in 5 years, and she needed a partner who matched that financially. She even said she'd looked up the cost of living in certain neighborhoods she wanted to live in, and that's why salary progression mattered so much to her. Meanwhile, my food sat in front of me, completely untouched. I couldn't even think about eating while she was basically laying out a contract. She asked me if I had plans to move up in my company, if I had thought about asking for raises, if I had a growth plan. She used those words like this was a corporate meeting. I tried to give her vague answers just to keep the peace, but every word out of her mouth made me want to run. She went on to say she wasn't the type to settle. She mentioned she had ended her last relationship because the guy lacked ambition and didn't get promoted fast enough. She said she needed someone who wanted more, always more. I couldn't believe I was sitting there listening to this. It wasn't a conversation. It was an evaluation. I half expected her to pull out a notepad and start jotting down my answers. The atmosphere was so awkward that even the waiter seemed to notice. He came by to check on us, gave me this sympathetic look, and asked if everything was all right. I nodded quickly, hoping he'd stick around longer, but he left, and Nicole went right back into it. She told me she thought people should be honest about money up front, that too many relationships failed because people danced around the subject. She said she wanted to filter out men who didn't meet her standards early so she didn't waste time. The kicker was when she asked me directly how much I currently made. Not in a roundabout way, not casually, she wanted the number. Right there, over dinner, like it was normal to ask that before dessert. I deflected again, saying I was comfortable and didn't have issues covering my bills. She frowned, said that was a non-answer, and started talking about how she believed in financial transparency. I kept nodding, but my mind was screaming at me to just get through the night. By the time the check came, I couldn't have been more relieved. The total was $76, and I paid it without hesitation just to end the whole ordeal. She didn't even pretend to reach for her wallet. She just smiled, thanked me, and sipped the last of her wine. We walked outside, and she gave me a hug, acting like everything went perfectly. She said she'd consider seeing me again if I showed enough ambition in the coming months. Those were her exact words. I smiled, nodded, and walked away as fast as I could. On the drive home, I was still in disbelief. I replayed the whole conversation in my head, trying to wrap my mind around how someone could be that blunt about money on a first date. It wasn't just honesty, it was cold, calculated, like she was interviewing me for the role of financial provider. I never texted her again, and she didn't reach out either. Maybe she sensed I wasn't going to pass her little test. Or maybe she had a list of other candidates she was working her way through. Either way, I was glad to be off the hook. That night taught me something, not about money or ambition, but about how bizarre it feels when someone turns dinner into a salary review. And that was Nicole, a date that felt less like a meal and more like an HR meeting. I don't know why I said yes to Chris in the first place. Looking back, I think it was because he seemed confident in a way that stood out from the other guys I've been talking to. Not over the top or anything, but he had this way of speaking like he already knew what he wanted. At the time, I thought that sounded kind of refreshing. I figured, hey, maybe confidence is a good thing. I learned pretty quickly that there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. We met at this steakhouse he picked out. It wasn't super fancy, but definitely pricier than the places I usually go. Dim lighting, white tablecloths, waiters in pressed shirts. It had the vibe of a place where you're supposed to sit up straighter than usual. I showed up a little early and was looking through the menu when Chris arrived. He gave me this big smile, slid into his seat, and immediately started talking like we'd known each other for years. At first, it wasn't bad. He was funny enough, a little loud, but I told myself he was probably just trying to fill the silence. We made some small talk. He asked about my day, and I started to relax a bit. Then the waiter came over with menus, and that's when things took a sharp turn. Before I even opened mine, Chris held his hand up like he was taking control of the situation. He told the waiter we didn't need menus. He said he'd order for both of us. I thought maybe he was joking, so I laughed. But he wasn't laughing. He looked at me with this smug little smile and said, "Don't worry, I know what women like." I froze for a second, then forced a smile because I didn't want to cause a scene. Inside, though, I was thinking, what the hell? Who does that? It was our first date. He didn't even ask me what I liked or if I had allergies. He just decided he knew best. He ordered himself a ribeye steak and then ordered me a grilled chicken salad with dressing on the side. I swear, my jaw almost dropped. I hadn't even opened my mouth to say what I wanted, and this man had just decided I'd be eating a salad like I was on some forced diet plan. When the waiter walked away, I tried to laugh it off, asking why he didn't let me order for myself. He shrugged and said women shouldn't have to make food choices, that it was a man's job to take care of it. He actually said that with a straight face, like it was chivalry instead of straight-up controlling. I wanted to tell him off right there, but I bit my tongue. I figured I'd at least get through dinner, then make my exit, but it didn't stop there. The whole time we were waiting for food, he kept doubling down. He started talking about how women always get indecisive with menus, how they take too long, and how it was easier if the man just handled it. He said it was old school and that women secretly liked it. I sat there, smiling politely, but inside I was fuming. I wasn't enjoying the conversation at all, and I was starving. When the food finally came, I stared at the salad like it was an insult. A sad pile of lettuce with some grilled chicken on top, sitting across from his giant juicy steak. He dug in, moaning about how good it was, while I picked at my salad and wished I had spoken up. He noticed I wasn't eating much and actually had the nerve to say, "See, it's good I ordered light for you." I nearly lost it right there. The rest of the night didn't improve. He kept talking about his views on gender roles, saying things like how women shouldn't stress about work and how men should make the big decisions. He even mentioned that his mom never cooked for herself because his dad always handled the meals. The way he said it made it sound less like love and more like control. I tried to change the subject a few times, but he always circled back to the same theme: men lead, women follow. At one point, he even joked that if we ended up dating, he'd probably order for me every time. I laughed nervously, but my insides were screaming no. When the check came, it was $84. He pulled out his card immediately and paid without hesitation, which was about the only redeeming moment of the whole night. But even then, he had to ruin it by saying, "See, that's how it works. I pay, I decide." Walking out of the restaurant, I couldn't get to my car fast enough. He tried to walk me, and I let him because I didn't want to be rude, but when he leaned in for a hug, I kept it short. He smiled, said he had a great time, and told me he'd text me to set up another dinner. The second I got into my car, I exhaled so loudly I startled myself. I couldn't believe I just sat through an entire dinner being treated like I didn't even have the right to order my own food. On the drive home, I kept replaying the moment he waved the menus away like he was proud of himself. Who does that on a first date? Who assumes they know what someone else wants before even asking? It wasn't charming. It wasn't thoughtful. It was insulting. I told a couple friends about it later, and they were just as horrified. One of them said I should have stood up and ordered a steak just to make a point. Maybe I should have. But honestly, I was too shocked in the moment to even argue. Chris texted me the next day saying he hoped I enjoyed my salad and that he couldn't wait to take charge again soon. I didn't reply. I blocked his number right after that. That was the end of Chris, the man who thought women shouldn't order their own meals. Confidence? No, just arrogance dressed up as old-fashioned manners. Some dates go wrong in ways you expect. Bad chemistry, awkward silences, maybe someone being rude. But the date I had with Jenna, that one didn't just go wrong. It felt like I walked into the middle of a breakup I didn't sign up for. I met Jenna through a friend of a friend. Not an app this time, which I thought was a good sign. Usually when someone's introduced to you, there's at least some filter. My buddy had said she was single, funny, and ready to get back out there. That phrase should have been my first clue, but I ignored it. We agreed to meet for drinks at this casual bar not too far from where I live. It wasn't fancy, just a spot with pool tables, neon beer signs, and music loud enough to fill the gaps in conversation without being overwhelming. I got there a little early, grabbed a table in the corner, and waited. She showed up looking nice, jeans, a simple top, hair done. She gave me a smile when she saw me, but there was something in her eyes that looked off. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was nervous. We ordered a couple of drinks and started talking. For the first 5 minutes, everything seemed fine. She laughed at a joke I made, asked me about work, told me a story about her dog. I thought, okay, this could be decent. But then, out of nowhere, she leaned in, dropped her voice like she was confessing a secret, and told me she had just broken up with her boyfriend that morning. I froze with my beer halfway to my mouth. Morning, as in less than 12 hours before sitting across from me. I tried to process it, thinking maybe she meant recently, but she clarified before I could even ask. She said they'd had a huge fight that morning, ended things officially, and she didn't want to waste time being sad. My brain was screaming red flag, but I stayed calm on the outside. I asked her gently if she was okay, and she shrugged like it was no big deal. She said she was fine, that she actually felt empowered and ready to move on. I nodded, but inside I knew I was basically on a rebound date. And sure enough, the conversation quickly turned into a monologue about her ex. She brought him up constantly. She mentioned how long they'd been together, how they used to come to this exact bar, how he never appreciated her. I sat there sipping my drink, nodding at the right moments, but I was basically just an audience for her venting. The worst part was how raw it still was. She wasn't telling these stories like funny "my ex was crazy" stories. She was telling them like she was still in the middle of the breakup. Her voice would crack a little when she mentioned certain things, and she'd get angry at others. At one point, she even pulled out her phone to show me a picture of him, just to prove how average he looked. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't about to tell her to stop talking about it, because clearly she needed to get it out, but it was so awkward. I felt less like a date and more like a therapist. Halfway through the night, it got even stranger. She admitted she had agreed to go out with me not because she was interested in dating, but because she wanted to make her ex jealous. She actually said that out loud, looking me dead in the eyes like it was totally fine. I sat there stunned. She laughed a little and said she knew he still kept tabs on her socials, so posting about a date would drive him crazy. Then she pulled out her phone and asked if I'd mind taking a picture with her for Instagram. I was floored. I didn't want to be rude, so I half smiled and leaned in for a quick photo, but inside I was screaming. This wasn't a date anymore. I was being used as a prop in some messy breakup saga. After that, she loosened up a little, probably because she'd gotten the picture she wanted. But the conversation didn't improve much. She kept circling back to him, making little digs, telling me how much better I was already, even though she barely knew me. It felt forced, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I ordered some food just to give myself something to do, but even then, she compared it to how her ex used to hate bar food. Everything came back to him. Every single thing. By the time the check came, I was beyond ready to leave. The total was $43. I paid it without thinking, just wanting to wrap it up clean. She thanked me, smiled, and said she had a fun time. Fun. That's what she called it. We walked out together, and she gave me a hug before heading to her car. As she pulled out her phone, I realized she was already typing, probably sending that Instagram photo to her story. I shook my head, got in my car, and drove home in silence. The whole drive, I couldn't stop thinking about how blindsided I'd been. I thought I was going on a date, but really, I'd been drafted into a breakup battle I wanted no part of. Later that night, I checked Instagram just out of curiosity. Sure enough, there was the photo, her smiling, me in the background holding a beer, captioned with something vague like "new chapter." The comments were already rolling in, and I couldn't help but wonder if her ex had seen it yet. I didn't text her after, and she didn't text me either. Honestly, I think she got exactly what she wanted out of that night, and I was just the unlucky guy who happened to be sitting across from her. That was Jenna. A date that wasn't really a date, just a messy rebound wrapped in drinks and bar food. There are bad dates, and then there are dates where you feel like you got dragged into an interrogation you didn't sign up for. That's what happened with Mark. Honestly, the whole night felt less like a first date and more like I was sitting in front of some judge being cross-examined about my past. The way it started wasn't even bad. We matched online, talked for a few days, nothing outly ordinary. He wasn't super charming over messages, but he seemed normal enough. He asked me out for dinner at this diner type place, and I thought, all right, low pressure, can't be that bad. When I showed up, the place was buzzing like it always is, families with kids, couples in booths, the smell of fries and burgers in the air. I like places like that because it's casual, you don't have to dress up too much, and the food is always decent. I got a booth near the back, and Mark came in a few minutes later. He looked fine, clean shirt, jeans, nothing weird. He smiled, sat down, and for the first 10 minutes, I thought maybe this would actually be a pretty average night. We ordered our food, me a burger and fries, him a club sandwich, and started with the usual small talk. Hobbies, work, what shows we were reading. I was starting to relax a little when suddenly he asked me how many people I'd dated before him. I laughed awkwardly, thinking it was just a casual question. But then I realized he wasn't joking. He leaned in, waiting for a real answer, eyes locked on me like it was the most important thing he could know. I shrugged, said something vague like, oh, a few here and there, trying to keep it light. But that wasn't good enough for him. He pressed again. He wanted a number. The way he asked made me uncomfortable. It wasn't curiosity, it was like he was testing me. I tried to brush it off with a joke, but he didn't laugh. He repeated the question, more serious this time, and then added that he couldn't tolerate a high number. I sat back in my seat, stunned. I didn't even know what he meant by high. What was considered high in his head? 3, 10, 50. The fact that he thought it was even a fair question made my skin crawl. I told him I didn't think it was really a first date kind of topic. He frowned like my answer was already disappointing him. Then he went on this mini rant about how he believed in purity and how relationships get messy if someone has been with too many people. He wasn't saying it shyly either. He was speaking like he was laying down the law. The food came, but my appetite was gone. I pushed my fries around the plate while he kept at it, asking more questions. How many serious relationships had I had? How long did they last? Who ended them? Did I cheat? Did they cheat? He wasn't just asking. He was drilling me like he had a checklist he needed to fill out before he even considered a second date. Every time I tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, he brought it back. I mentioned my favorite kind of movies, and he asked if I used to watch them with exes. I mentioned traveling once, and he asked if I'd traveled with past boyfriends. It was relentless. At one point, I asked him why it mattered so much. He said he just wanted to make sure he wasn't someone's sloppy seconds. The words made my jaw clench. I couldn't believe he actually said that out loud on a first date with zero shame. I wanted to get up and leave, but I forced myself to stay until the end of the meal. He sat there eating his sandwich like nothing was wrong, while I gave one-word answers and tried to keep my cool. He didn't even notice how uncomfortable I was. When the check came, it was $29. He slid it toward me without hesitation and said we should split. I didn't even argue. I just threw down enough cash to cover my half and sat there waiting for him to finish paying. Walking out of the diner, he acted like nothing had happened. He smiled, said he had a good time, and asked if I wanted to hang out again soon. I stared at him in disbelief. Did he not pick up on the fact that I'd basically shut down halfway through? Did he think his interrogation was charming? I mumbled something about being busy and got into my car as fast as I could. The whole drive home, I kept replaying his questions in my head, wondering if he actually thought that was normal. I've had weird first dates before, but I'd never had someone flat out grill me about my past like it was some kind of exam. Later that night, he texted me, asking if I thought more about his question and if I was ready to be honest about my dating history. I stared at the message, shook my head, and blocked him right then. The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth, not because I cared about his approval, but because it reminded me how some people go into dating not looking for a connection, but looking for reasons to disqualify you. That's what it felt like with Mark. He wasn't there to get to know me. He was there to dig through my past until he found something to hold against me. And that was that. A night that was supposed to be about burgers and casual conversation turned into a quiz I never signed up for. The thing about dating is you always expect a little weirdness. Nobody is completely normal when you're first sitting across from them. Some people get nervous and talk too much, some barely talk at all, and others try way too hard to sound impressive. I can usually roll with it, but my night with Lydia, that one felt less like a date and more like I'd stumbled into some kind of competition I didn't even know I'd entered. We matched online, talked for a few days, and set up dinner for a Friday night. She picked a place downtown that was kind of trendy, one of those spots where the lights are dim, the music is just loud enough to make you lean in a little, and every plate looks like it was designed for Instagram. Not really my style, but I figured it could be fun. I got there a few minutes early, sat at the bar, and waited. When she walked in, I'll admit, she looked great. She had that polished kind of look, hair done perfectly, outfit that looked like it took thought, but didn't scream trying too hard. She smiled when she spotted me. I thought, okay, this could be a good night. We sat down, ordered drinks, and the first 20 minutes went smoothly. We talked about work, about random hobbies, even about our favorite takeout spots. She laughed at a couple of my dumb jokes, and I felt myself relaxing into it. Then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she leaned forward, lowered her voice like she was about to tell me something personal, and dropped a line that made my fork pause midair. She said she wasn't planning to be exclusive anytime soon because she wanted to keep dating multiple people until she made her final pick. At first, I thought she was joking. It sounded like something you'd say on a reality dating show. But she wasn't smiling. She was completely serious. She explained that she believed dating should be like an audition process. She wanted to see all her options before committing to anyone, and she wanted me to know upfront that she was currently going on dates with other guys too. I sat there blinking, not even sure how to respond. I mean, I get that people date around before settling on someone. That's normal. But announcing it on the first date like it's some kind of contest, that was new. She kept going, explaining how she didn't believe in wasting time with just one person when she would keep her options open. She even said she had a little system, rating people on certain qualities like ambition, looks, and how much fun they were. She told me, casually, that I was already doing pretty well in her head so far. I stared at her, trying to keep my face neutral, but inside I was floored. It wasn't just that she was seeing other people, it was how openly she treated it like a game. Like I was competing without even realizing I'd signed up. The main course arrived, and I was barely tasting my food because she kept talking about it. She told me about other dates she had lined up that week, even gave me details about one guy who had already taken her to a fancy rooftop bar. She laughed while telling me how another guy had bored her to death talking about crypto. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. I nodded and smiled, but the whole time, my brain was screaming, what the hell am I doing here? The weirdest part was how confident she was about it. She didn't think it was rude. She thought it was honest. She said she wanted to be transparent so no one got the wrong idea. She claimed she was just being efficient. At one point, she even asked me how I felt about being one of several, like it was something I should have an opinion on. I muttered something about how I wasn't really into competition dating, but she waved it off, saying it was the modern way to date. I pushed my pasta around my plate, nodding when she talked, but my mind was already checked out. The whole vibe was gone for me. I didn't feel like I was getting to know her. I felt like I was sitting in some audition round, waiting to hear if I made it to the next episode. When dessert menus came around, I declined immediately. She ordered something small, a chocolate tart, and even then, she mentioned another guy who had surprised her with dessert on their first date. It was relentless. By the time the check showed up, I was done. It was $64, and I paid it just to wrap things up quickly. She didn't even reach for her wallet, just thanked me like she was thanking a contestant for participating. We walked outside and she gave me a quick hug. She smiled and said she thought I had potential and that she'd let me know how things went. I almost laughed out loud. Potential. Let me know. She said it like she was a recruiter giving me feedback after an interview. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the ridiculousness of it. I understood the logic behind dating around, but the way she framed it, like a structured elimination process, just made me feel gross. Who wants to sit across from someone knowing they're already mentally comparing you to 3 other people from the same week? I never texted her again, and she never reached out either. Maybe she eliminated me right away, or maybe she just didn't feel like updating me on where I stood in her bracket. Either way, I didn't care. That was Lydia. A date that wasn't really a date. It was an audition, and I didn't even want the role. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's people who treat waiters badly. That's always been one of my rules. If someone's rude to the staff, that's the last date. But Ben took it a step further. He wasn't just rude. He had a whole philosophy about why he doesn't believe in tipping, and he decided to explain it to me in detail while we were out at dinner. I met Ben through an app, same as half my dates. His profile made him seem normal enough, smiling photos, a line about liking hiking, another about being into cooking. We messaged a few times, and he suggested grabbing dinner. I thought, fine, simple enough. We ended up at this burger place I liked. Not a fancy spot, just a casual sit-down restaurant with neon lights on the wall and menus laminated so they could survive a hurricane. It wasn't expensive, but the food was solid. I figured it would be a good low-key setting for a first date. Ben showed up on time, looking decent enough. Shirt, jeans, sneakers. He smiled, said hi, and we sat down. The first part of the date wasn't bad. We ordered drinks, talked a bit about our jobs, joked about the menu having too many burger variations. He seemed fine. Then our waiter came over. Nice guy, friendly, cracked a quick joke about how hungry we looked. I ordered my food, and Ben made some sarcastic comment about how long it would probably take. The waiter laughed it off, but I already felt my eyebrow twitch. The drinks came, then the food, and everything seemed fine again. We were eating, chatting about movies, and I started to think maybe I was overanalyzing his tone. And then the check landed on the table. That's when everything went downhill fast. The bill was around $37. I reached for my wallet, but Ben insisted on covering it since he had invited me. Fine by me. But then I watched as he grabbed the pen, scribbled down the total amount of the bill, and left the tip line completely blank. I stared at the receipt, then back at him, thinking maybe he just forgot. So I asked, "Hey, you're not leaving a tip." He leaned back in his chair, completely calm, and said, "Oh, I don't believe in tipping." I thought he was joking. I laughed nervously, waiting for him to smirk and say he was messing with me. But nope, he was dead serious. He launched into this whole rant about how tipping is a scam, how restaurant owners should just pay their staff properly, and how it's not his job to subsidize someone else's paycheck. I sat there, jaw clenched, listening to him go on about the system and how refusing to tip was his way of taking a stand. He actually said he was principled about it. Meanwhile, our waiter was probably standing at another table busting his ass for minimum wage plus tips, and this guy was sitting across from me bragging about stiffing him. I tried to explain that waiters literally survive on tips, but Ben waved me off like I was naive. He said if everyone stopped tipping, the restaurants would have to pay more. I wanted to bang my head on the table. That's not how it works, and even if it was, screwing over one waiter at a burger joint on a random Friday night wasn't going to start a revolution. The worst part, he actually seemed proud of himself. He told me he hadn't tipped in years, that he always made sure the line was blank so the message was clear. I couldn't believe I was sitting across from a grown man bragging about saving a few dollars at the expense of people who were just trying to make rent. I pushed my food around the plate, trying not to snap, but it got harder by the second. He even tried to spin it like he was being smart with his money. He said most people waste cash tipping when they don't have to, and he was disciplined enough not to. Disciplined. That's what he called it. I thought about slipping cash onto the table myself, but he had already grabbed the bill and tucked it away. The waiter came back, smiled politely, and thanked us, clearly hoping for something that wasn't coming. My stomach turned. After that, the vibe was gone. I gave short answers to everything Ben said, counting down the seconds until I could leave. He didn't even notice. He kept rambling about how he was planning a road trip, how he thought most restaurants were overpriced anyway, and how people needed to wake up about tipping culture. When we finally walked outside, he was all smiles. He actually said he thought the night went great and that we should go out again. I forced a smile, said I'd let him know, and practically sprinted to my car. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the waiter. I pictured him picking up the receipt, seeing the blank line, and just sighing. I felt guilty by association, like I'd been part of the insult. When I got home, I texted a friend about it, and she told me I should have slipped cash on the table anyway. She was right, but in the moment, I was too stunned to even think of it. Ben texted me the next day saying he had a great time and wanted to grab dinner again soon. I didn't respond. A couple of days later, he followed up with another message, joking that I'd better pick a restaurant where the service didn't expect tips. That sealed it. I blocked his number. That was the end of Ben, a man so principled about tipping that he ruined a perfectly decent burger dinner and made me never want to see him again. The weirdest part about my date with Olivia is that the night started out completely normal. Like, painfully normal. Nothing about the beginning hinted that it was going to go sideways. Usually, when a date is about to be a disaster, you can feel it in the first 5 minutes. With her, the red flags didn't wave until the middle of dinner, and by then I was stuck. We'd matched online and had been talking for maybe a week. She seemed fun enough, cracked a few jokes, asked real questions instead of just one-word replies. Her profile said she loved concerts and trying new food, and she didn't come off as high maintenance. I thought, all right, this one might actually be chill. We picked a casual Mexican spot near her side of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a neighborhood restaurant with colorful walls, loud music, and giant portions. You could smell a fajita sizzling the second you walked in. I got there first, grabbed a table, and texted her where I was sitting. She came in a few minutes later, smiling, looking relaxed, and I thought, okay, good start. The first part of the night was fine. We ordered drinks, joked about how big the margaritas were, and shared chips and salsa. Conversation was flowing. She told me about her dog, I told her about my siblings, and everything felt easy. I was actually thinking maybe this could lead to a second date. And then, somewhere between ordering dinner and the food actually arriving, she tilted her head, gave me this thoughtful look, and said she needed to ask me something important. I thought maybe it was going to be about relationships or family or whatever, but no, she asked me how tall I really was. I laughed, thinking she was just teasing me, but she wasn't smiling. She repeated the question, dead serious. I said I was 6 feet, same thing I'd put on my profile. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you sure?" I was caught off guard. Of course I was sure. I've been the same height since high school. But she wasn't buying it. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said she only dates men over 6 feet tall, so she needed proof. I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. But she pulled her phone out of her purse and said, "Do you have your driver's license on you? I want to see it." My jaw dropped. She wasn't kidding. She wanted me to actually pull out my ID so she could check my height. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "You can tell by looking, can't you?" But she shook her head, saying guys always lie about their height on apps. She said she'd been tricked before and wasn't about to waste her time again. I sat there stunned. Here I was, sitting across the table eating chips, and this girl was demanding government-issued proof that I wasn't lying about a few inches of height. I half expected her to pull out a measuring tape from her bag. When I didn't immediately reach for my wallet, she pressed again. "Just show me your license, it'll only take a second." She said it so casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. I felt my face heat up. I wasn't about to show my ID on a first date just to prove my height, but she wouldn't let it go. She said if I wasn't willing to show it, then she had to assume I was lying. The waiter brought our food at that exact moment, and I swear I wanted to thank him for interrupting. He set down my plate of enchiladas and her tacos, and for a few blessed seconds, the conversation paused. But the second he walked away, she brought it up again. I tried to switch the topic, asking about her job, her family, anything to get away from the height thing. She gave short answers and then circled back to it. It was like she couldn't let it go. Finally, I sighed and told her, "Look, I'm 6 feet. If you don't believe me, that's your problem." She frowned, shook her head, and muttered something about how it would have been easier if I'd just shown her my license. After that, the vibe was gone. I ate my food in silence, while she kept picking at hers and glancing at me like she was trying to decide if I was lying. I'd never felt so judged over something so stupid in my life. She did eventually ease up a little, but by then I was done. I wasn't interested in trying to win her over anymore. She started talking about how all her past boyfriends were tall and how it was a requirement for her. She even joked, though it didn't feel like a joke, that shorter men made her feel unsafe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't even mad at that point, just exhausted. The whole date had gone from decent to ridiculous in the span of 20 minutes. When the check came, it was $52. I paid it just to wrap things up quickly. She didn't offer to split, didn't even glance at the bill, just sat back and sipped the last of her margarita. We walked outside and she gave me a quick hug. She smiled and said she'd let me know if she wanted to see me again. I nodded and said goodbye and walked to my car, shaking my head the whole way. The drive home was just me replaying the moment she asked for my license over and over, and each time it sounded more ridiculous. Who actually does that? Who cares so much about a few inches that they demand official proof? I'd never texted her again, and she didn't reach out either, which was fine by me. That night was more than enough. If I had to rank my worst dates, the one with Kyle would probably be near the top. Not because he was the rudest guy I've ever met, but because of how casually he dropped his little expectation at the end of the night. It wasn't just annoying, it was insulting in a way I didn't see coming. The night started normal, almost boring. We'd been messaging back and forth for about a week, nothing deep, just enough small talk to decide to meet in person. Kyle seemed like a safe bet. Nothing crazy in his profile, normal job, decent looking. He suggested dinner, and I went along with it. We met at a pizza place I'd been to a couple times before. It wasn't some hole in the wall, but not high-end either. Kind of a middle ground spot. Checkered tablecloths, brick walls, the smell of garlic bread hitting you the second you walked in. Countless were there, couples too, the usual Friday night vibe. Kyle was already at a table when I walked in, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, waved, and smiled. First impression wasn't bad. We said our hellos, ordered drinks, and settled in. The first part of the conversation was fine. Not great, not terrible. He talked a lot about his car, which I didn't care much about, and then about some video games he was into. I tried to keep up and throw in some stories about my week, but honestly, it wasn't the most engaging back and forth. Still, it wasn't awful. I've sat through worse. We ordered a medium pizza to share, and when it came out, things actually loosened up a little. Food always helps. We laughed about how hot the cheese was, and I started to think maybe the night would at least be easy, even if it wasn't fireworks. But then, right as the plates were being cleared and the waiter dropped the check on the table, Kyle leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said something that made my eyebrows shoot up. He told me I should pay the entire bill since he'd already spent money on gas driving to meet me. At first, I thought he was kidding. I even chuckled, waiting for him to crack a smile or say he was joking. But no, he was serious. He explained, very matter of fact, that he'd driven 25 minutes to get there, and with gas prices the way they were, it was only fair that I covered dinner. I just stared at him. My brain was scrambling for words because I'd never heard anything like that before. He wasn't embarrassed or awkward about it either. He said it so casually, like it was the most logical thing in the world. I asked him if he was serious, and he nodded, saying that dates should be balanced, and he didn't see why he should pay when he'd already contributed by making the trip. I wanted to laugh in his face, but I also wanted to throw my water on him. Instead, I just sat there in stunned silence for a second, trying to decide what to do. The bill was sitting there waiting, and he was just staring at me like he'd made a perfectly reasonable request. The total was $41. Not a crazy amount, but that wasn't the point. The principle of it made my blood boil. I reached into my bag, pulled out my card, and slapped it on the table without saying a word. If that's how he wanted to play it, fine. I'd pay, but he wasn't going to hear from me again. The waiter came back, picked up the bill, and gave me a polite smile. I could tell he knew exactly what was going on. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said, "Sorry you're dealing with this guy." While we waited for the receipt, Kyle went on like nothing had happened. He started talking about his favorite pizza toppings and how he thought pineapple on pizza should be illegal. I wanted to scream. He acted like he hadn't just asked me to cover the whole meal because of his gas money. When the waiter brought the receipt back, I signed it quickly and shoved it into the folder. Kyle didn't even say thank you. He just stood up, stretched, and said, "That worked out pretty good." We walked outside together, and the air felt heavier than it had when I'd walked in. He asked if I wanted to hang out again sometime, and I literally laughed out loud. I didn't even bother making up an excuse. I just said, "No, I don't think so," and headed straight to my car. The drive home was me replaying the conversation over and over, trying to figure out how someone could actually think like that. Who goes on a date and then demands the other person cover the whole thing because of gas? That's not logic. That's cheapest disguised as reasoning. I told my friends about it later, and they couldn't stop laughing. One of them said I should pull out a calculator and charge him for my makeup and outfit since I invested to be there. Another said I should have asked for a Venmo request for my Uber ride home. Honestly, they were right. If he wanted to play petty games, I could have out-pettied him. But in the moment, I was too stunned. Kyle texted me later that night, saying he had a nice time and asking when I wanted to go out again. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then blocked his number without replying. That was the end of Kyle. A date that started with garlic bread and ended with me paying for everything while he justified it with gas prices. I've had plenty of weird first dates, but the one with Jake still stands out because of how completely random and uncomfortable it got. I've never in my life sat across from someone who thought it was appropriate to dig into my past like I was a contestant on some fitness reality show. We had been chatting for a little while online before deciding to meet up. Jake seemed normal on the surface. He had pictures of himself hiking, hanging out with friends, even one with his dog. His messages were decent too. Nothing creepy, nothing too bland. So when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I said sure. He picked a casual place, kind of a sports bar vibe. TVs on every wall, loud enough that you could hear the game, but not so loud that you couldn't talk. Burgers, wings, sandwiches, the usual. I thought it was a safe choice. Nothing fancy, nothing intimidating. When I got there, he was already waiting in a booth. He waved me over, stood up, and gave me a quick smile. First impression wasn't bad. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started with the usual small talk. Work, hobbies, random stuff about movies. Nothing out of the ordinary. Our food came and we were halfway through eating when the conversation took a turn I couldn't have predicted in a million years. Out of nowhere, Jake leaned forward, gave me the serious look, and asked how much I weighed in high school. I froze, staring at him like he just spoke in another language. I thought maybe I'd misheard him over the noise of the TV. But no, he repeated the question. Clear as day, he wanted to know my weight when I was a teenager. I laughed awkwardly, waiting for him to crack a smile and admit he was joking. But he didn't. He just sat there, waiting for me to answer. I asked him why in the world he wanted to know something like that. He shrugged and said he was just curious. He said weight told him a lot about a person's lifestyle and discipline. I felt my face heat up. Discipline? Who even talks like that on a first date? I told him I didn't remember my exact weight back then. He nodded like he didn't believe me and pushed again, asking if I could at least give him an estimate. I wanted to get up and walk out right then, but instead, I just stared at him, trying to process how this man thought it was appropriate to ask something so invasive. When I didn't answer, he switched gears and asked how much I weighed now. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We were sitting there surrounded by people eating wings and nachos, and this guy was basically giving me a personal weighed interview. I told him flat out that it wasn't a question he should be asking. He frowned, like I was being difficult, and said he was just trying to get to know me better. He added that he valued honesty and thought people should be upfront about things like that. The rest of my meal sat untouched. I couldn't even look at my burger anymore. Every time I tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, he circled back. He asked if I'd ever struggled with weight, if I'd dieted in the past, if I ever weighed myself regularly. It was relentless. At one point, he even tried to soften it by telling me his own weight history. How much he weighed in high school, how he slimmed down in college, what he weighed now. He said it like we were swapping fun facts, but all I wanted was for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. The vibe was dead after that. I gave him short answers, avoided eye contact, and just waited for the check. When it finally came, it was $44. He looked at it, then at me, and said, "Do you want to split it?" I didn't even argue. I tossed down enough cash to cover my part, just so I could get out of there. As we walked outside, he acted like nothing weird had happened. He smiled, said he had a good time, and told me he'd like to see me again. I just nodded, said goodbye, and got in my car without looking back. The drive home was me replaying the conversation in my head, getting more and more annoyed. Who asks about someone's high school way on a first date? Who thinks that's normal? It wasn't just rude, it was bizarre. I told my friends about it later, and they were stunned. One of them joked that I should have made up an outrageous number just to see his reaction. Another said I should have turned it back on him and asked how tall he was in middle school. Honestly, maybe I should have, but in the moment, I was too stunned to even joke. Jake texted me the next day, thanking me for the date and asking if I wanted to go hiking with him that weekend. I didn't respond. A couple of days later, he sent another message saying he hoped my fitness journey was going well. That was it for me. I blocked his number immediately. That was Jake. A night that started with burgers and ended with me being grilled about my weight history like I was on some kind of interview panel. Sometimes you go into a date expecting it to be just average, nothing mind-blowing. Maybe a decent dinner and some laughs. That's exactly what I thought was going to happen when I met Madison. It wasn't like I had super high hopes or thought she was going to be the one or anything. I just figured she seemed cool over messages, and it was a Friday night, so why not? We'd been messaging for about a week. She was quick with replies, not one of those people who leaves you hanging for 2 days, and she threw in plenty of emojis that made her seem kind of playful. She had a sarcastic sense of humor that came through even in text, which is rare, and she asked questions too, like actual questions about me, not just what's up. That was enough for me to say yes when she suggested grabbing dinner. We picked this Italian restaurant in the middle of town. Not fancy, but not cheap either. Dim lighting, soft music playing, and these little candles on every table that gave it that first date atmosphere. The smell of garlic and baked bread hit me as soon as I walked in, and I was already thinking about ordering pasta. Madison showed up right on time, walking in with a big smile like she actually wanted to be there. She looked good, but not overdressed. Jeans, a nice top, hair done in a way that looked like she cared but wasn't trying too hard. She gave me a quick hug when we met by the door, and then we sat down. Right away, she was easy to talk to. Some people make you pull teeth in the first 10 minutes, but she kept the conversation moving. She joked about the traffic she'd hit getting there, teased me for how seriously I was studying the menu, and laughed when the waiter asked if we wanted sparkling or still water. It felt natural, not forced. We ordered drinks. She got wine, I got a beer, and some garlic nuts to share. We started talking about our weeks, about work, about random hobbies. She told me she liked painting sometimes, even though she wasn't good at it, and I told her about playing basketball with friends. We laughed about stupid shows we both read, swapped a couple stories about college, and I remember thinking this one was actually going pretty well. The food came, big plates of pasta that smelled incredible, and for a while everything was good. We joked about who got the bigger portion, argued lightly about pineapple on pizza, and I honestly felt like maybe this was one of the smoother first dates I'd had in a while. Then, right as we were finishing up, Madison set her fork down, looked me straight in the eyes, and said she needed to be honest about something. My stomach dropped a little because nothing good ever follows that sentence. I braced myself, thinking maybe she was going to say she wasn't interested, or she was moving soon, or something like that. But no, what came out of her mouth was way worse. She told me very calmly that she was still in love with her ex. I froze. I think I actually blinked a few times, waiting to see if she was joking. But she wasn't. She leaned in, resting her elbows on the table, and explained that if he called her tomorrow and asked her to get back together, she'd probably say yes. I sat there stunned, staring at her, wondering if I'd just misheard her over the clinking glasses and background music. But no, she said it again, clear as day. She was still in love with her ex. At first, I thought maybe she meant she had some lingering feelings, the way people sometimes do after a breakup. But no, she clarified. Full on in love, still thought about him constantly. Still wished things had worked out. My appetite disappeared instantly. My pasta, half eaten, sat in front of me, and suddenly I wasn't hungry at all. I couldn't wrap my head around why she would even be on a date if that's where her head was. I asked her gently why she was out with me if she wasn't over him. She shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal, and said she was testing the waters. She admitted she was hoping dating would help her move on, but she didn't want to lie about her feelings. She said she thought it was better to be upfront, so I knew where she stood. I forced a nod, trying to stay polite, but inside I was frustrated. Not because she had feelings for her ex, that happens, but because she wasted my time. She had to know before we even sat down that she wasn't ready for this. She kept talking about him too. Not in an angry way, not even in a sad way, more like someone reminiscing about their favorite movie. She mentioned how long they'd been together, the trips they took, even little habits he had that she missed. I sat there nodding, but my brain was screaming, why am I listening to this on a first date? The waiter came by to clear our plates and asked if we wanted dessert. I shook my head so fast it probably looked rude. Madison said no too, still smiling like she hadn't just nuked the entire date. The check came minus $48, and I didn't hesitate. I slapped my card down immediately just to get the whole thing over with. She thanked me, smiled, and acted completely normal, as if telling someone you'd run back to your ex at the first chance wasn't the giant red flag it clearly was. We walked outside together, and she gave me another hug. She even said she'd had fun and hoped we could do it again. I muttered something non-committal, got into my car, and drove away as fast as I could. The whole drive home, I kept replaying the moment in my head. The way she said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal. Like I should just accept being a backup plan while she secretly wished for someone else. It wasn't just disappointing, it was insulting. When I told a couple of friends about it later, they couldn't stop laughing. One said I should have gotten up and left the second she mentioned her ex. Another said I should have asked if she wanted me to help text him for her. They weren't wrong. But honestly, I was too blindsided in the moment to even think of a comeback. I'd never texted her after that, and she never reached out either. Maybe she really did go back to her ex. Maybe she's still out there testing the waters on more dates she doesn't mean. Either way, I was glad to leave it behind.